We recognize that we gather on land seized from the Western Abenaki people by European colonizers. We respect the Abenaki's spiritual relationship to the land and waters of the Champlain Valley. We seek to build a peaceful and more just relationship with them and to promote knowledge about their history and culture. Good morning, and welcome to this Sunday morning service of the Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society. On this perfect winter day, my forecast says 20 degrees and sunny, and I just can't ever get enough of that deep blue winter sky. My name is Abby Sessions. This morning I serve as worship associate for a service led by our minister Barnaby Feeder with music by Ronnie Romano, and brought to you with the assistance of tech team members Rich Wolfson and Mary Hadley. Whether you come regularly, occasionally, or are with us for the very first time, whether you're with us on Zoom or watching later on YouTube, we are glad you're here at CVUUS. If this is your first time attending a service, please contact us so that we can share more about who we are and what we do and learn more about you. And please virtual guest book in the chat. If you have a milestone or a passage to share and have not yet sent it to Barnaby, please put it in the chat if you have not already sent it. And if you wish to join us for social hour after the service, just stay right where you are and you will get an invitation to a breakout room for social hour. We strive to be a welcoming and active presence in our community, working together to build a world which is more beautiful, just, and compassionate. There are many ways for us to connect with one another outside of Sunday services in fulfilling that mission. The best way to stay in touch, of course, is to read the Wednesday blast sent out by our office manager, Laura Esermely. If you'd like to be added to this email list, call the church office at 388-8080. Here are some highlights for this week. We hope to return soon, in fact, next Sunday, if current trends continue, to in-person services in our sanctuary. We encourage you to be vaccinated and to wear a good mask, such as an N95. When we return, there will be opportunities for new people to join the CVUUS tech team, your friends who do the important behind-the-scenes work of bringing the services to you both live and via Zoom. We'll need camera operators for the Zoom and sound managers for the sanctuary. Please consider these entry-level, no expertise required, training offered for free. And if you're interested, please contact me, Abby Sessions, or Barnaby. February is Black History Month. This might be a good time to join the Racial Justice Reading Group at CVUUS, which will meet February, March, and April on the fourth Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock via Zoom. We are reading the book Caste, The Origin of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson, which is an amazing study of race in this country. The next meeting is February 23rd. If you'd like to join or get more information, you could call the church office or contact Mike Greenwood or Jean Terwilliger. And finally, Rutland hopes to settle 100 Afghans in the near future in their city. Collection of household items for those families is continuing. And they can now accept furniture and kitchenwares. The full list is available in the blast, along with directions for how to deliver donations. Our call to worship this morning is number 429 in our hymnals, written by William F. Schultz, who was president of the Unitarian Universalist Association for 15 years, from 1978 to 1993. Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. Our chalice lighting this morning is number 448 by Christine Robinson. I'm going to light the chalice and let's say the words together. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together.
Now we've got a hymn number 347, Gather the Spirit.
Gather to celebrate once again. Thanks, Ronnie. So I have a question for everybody. And I need to open something while I talk to you. Here's my question. Can you think of a time when you were brave or courageous? Take a quick moment to just think of any time that you did anything that was brave. It can be absolutely tiny, and you're not going to have to share it. So you did something that was hard, something that was uncomfortable, something that was a risk, something that might fail. I'm asking because I want to talk a little bit about the idea of nonviolence. And the first principle of nonviolence is that it is a way of life for courageous people. It is a way of life for courageous people. This is a line from an article by Joel Mathis in a magazine called The Week. He wrote this a couple of years ago on Martin Luther King Day. He said, Dr. Martin Luther King was animated by a kind of hopefulness, that seems to have disappeared entirely from American politics. We have largely accepted our polarization, and most of us have decided the best route to justice is simply to beat the other side. King wanted something more. So that's what I want to talk about that just a little bit, and about some of the things that King wanted and why that comes back to us and the need for us to be courageous people. King wanted more than just social change. He challenged us to love. For him, nonviolence was not just for him, for the nonviolent movement, and the nonviolent philosophy coming from Gandhi, coming from Dr. King, coming from many leaders involved in the civil rights movement and involved now in leadership. Nonviolence isn't just a strategy. It's not just about a way to try to get what you want. It is about changing how we are in the world and changing our hearts and changing how we see people. Dr. King called it love in action. He also used a term that I just think is so great that was called soul force. Soul force. It was the idea of the strength that comes from that. He said, Dr. King said that he got his inspiration from Jesus Christ and his techniques from Gandhi. And that's really what goes into nonviolence, right? I used to think that when I first learned about civil rights history and specifically about the kind of protesting that happened, the first time I feel like I learned about it, the term that was used was passive resistance, like passive, like doing nothing, like just being there. And that is so completely the opposite of what nonviolence is about. Yes, it's about not being physically violent, but it's about having an incredibly strong energy in us when we come to fights, when we come to conflict, when we come into conversations with people that we disagree with, who have ideas that we hate. They have ideas, we have ideas that they hate. We can't see a way past it. It's about having a strength of love and belief in the humanity of the person we are with so strongly. That feeling is so strong that it is an energy that helps us be there. And that is not passive at all. That's why the term courageous is used, because it is really, really hard work. And it's work that trying to do it alone as an individual, I think for most of us is impossible. It's work that we need to learn about in community with others, right? Like a congregation like CVUUS. Dr. King laid out a couple of principles and steps, and I just want to mention a few key ones. The one that really strikes me the most is the third principle, which says nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice or evil, not people. Right? It seeks to defeat injustice or evil, not people. So it's recognizing that the people who are doing things that are evil or that we disagree with are also victims. So we're fighting against the injustice, not against the person, because in the end, we are working toward beloved community and being together. And if we treat the other people as evil, and if we even believe that in our hearts, that makes it pretty hard to try to come into real community with them in the end, even if we get what we want in that moment. Right? You can force someone into doing what you want sometimes, but it doesn't mean they're going to want to hang out with you afterward or work with you or come up with ideas with you. And that's what we're working toward, right? So it's choosing love instead of hate, right? He used to say, Dr. King would say, we need to love the hell out of everybody. Literally, I love that phrase, right? And he laid out steps. If you go to the King Center's website, there are steps that are laid out for how to do this work. And this is the last piece I'm going to share just in terms of some info, and then I'm going to leave you with a question about this. He knew how hard this work was. So he didn't just say, this is the right way to be, go do it, go be this way, because that's too hard. We can't do that. So he laid out steps. The first step was about gathering information from all sides of the argument, not just sticking with our own view in the way that we see things, but getting information, talking to other people, reading things written by people who have views that we disagree with, so that we're increasing our understanding and that we bring that understanding into the discussion or into the situation with the other people. So we're not just showing up with, here's what I believe, and I don't really care that much about what you do. I just think it's wrong, right? That's not a way forward very far. It was about his steps involve education. So we're learning ourselves, we're teaching others. And the goal is about increasing understanding, increasing empathy, increasing people understanding each other's views. Because in the end steps were about negotiating, trying to come up with win-wins, and reconciliation, which Dr. King talked about as the belief that, right, the arc of the universe bends toward justice. So it's this idea that we are constantly, that the universe is moving toward beloved community, moving toward coming together. The reconciliation, like, of our hearts coming back together. And in order for that to happen, we have to not just use nonviolence as an action, but really try to hold it in our hearts. This is really, really hard work. And I lift this up for you today because Reverend Barnaby is going to talk more about some of this. But I'm wanting to point out that in my experience, it doesn't work to just be told, be loving, embrace the humanity in each person. Because when it really gets hard, it's very hard for me to embrace the humanity when I'm seeing someone doing something that I think is just atrocious. So this is about learning and educating yourself, and ourselves, and as people, as a congregation. So I want to end with a quote and a question. John Lewis said, see if this makes you think of anything. John Lewis said, and I quote, "We were taught to respect the dignity and the worth of every human being, and never give up on anyone, to try to reach them with kindness, with hope and faith and love. The dignity and the worth of every human being, the worth and dignity in every human," right? Our first principle, and probably the hardest one, I think. So the question I leave you with is, does our faith call us to embrace nonviolence, not just as a strategy, but in our hearts, as a way of being with others? Can we be courageous people? That's what I'll leave you with, my dear ones. And now on to the offering.
Thank you so much, Poppy. Just, you might not have noticed, but just at 10 o'clock, my computer died and said, you have to restart. And I was rebooting just as the service started. And being able to listen to Poppy made me realize that the service would have been fine without me. She could have just continued on, and the discussion would have gotten to almost everything that I want to get to from a different angle, and for some of you, maybe even from a more helpful angle. So it also reminded me how important the Church of the Larger Fellowship, which is our donee that we're sharing our offering with, is this week. This is the UUA organization that's there for people who don't have a congregation anywhere near them, don't have the opportunity to join a group of people that has employed staff and made a building so that they can work more fully in creating community. And a third of their members are actually incarcerated people who are even limited in what material they can read. And so each February, when we choose a different Unitarian Universalist group on every Sunday to support, the first one in recent years has always been the Church of the Larger Fellowship. This is an outreach to thousands of UUs who don't have a community of ours, and they have to get online and relate that way. And I invite you to be as generous as you can be in supporting the Church of the Larger Fellowship. I only have one milestone that was sent to me during the week, and in this cold, wintry week, it's a beautiful milestone for us to have. And so I want to thank Lise Anderson for sharing this. Lise emailed me to say that after a month of feeding and coaxing an elusive young cat who had occupied our very cold barn since the beginning of January, Miles won her heart with his calm resolve and kind pats. She turns out to be a gentle, affectionate, mellow soul. We brought her inside a week ago, had her checked out on Monday, and happily welcomed Juno into the family and our B&B. So what a wonderful story of bringing a being in from the cold in the heart of winter. And Lise, it is a true milestone, not just for your family, but for us to celebrate. And I'm glad you shared it. Each week, of course, there are very important unspoken milestones and passages. Some of them are very happy, some of them are not so happy. And as a practice at CVUUS, we've learned we need to leave a time of silence for people to get in touch with what's on their hearts, to help them into the parts of our worship service where words don't work as well as simply getting in touch with your feelings. And so I'm going to lead you into this with an extremely brief prayer. May your journey this morning bring you to the spot where you feel truly centered, where you feel truly connected, where you feel ready to blossom and look out into the world to really notice with love and appreciation the community that has gathered around you this morning.
This week's ancient reading is the prequel to the troubling, ambiguous story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Hebrew book of God discloses to the prophet Abraham, whose nephew Lot resides in Sodom, the punishment he is considering for the two cities' unspecified grave sinfulness. Then Abraham came near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? If there are 50 righteous within the city, far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" And the Lord said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will forgive the whole place for their sake." Abraham answered, "Let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." The bargaining to save everyone for the sake of the righteous men goes on down to 40, then 30, then 20. And finally, Abraham says, "Oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak just once more. Suppose 10 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Our modern reading is a poem first published in the 1970s by Adrienne Rich. What kind of times are these? There's a place between 2 stands of trees where the grass grows uphill and the old Revolutionary Road breaks off into shadows, near a meeting house abandoned by the persecuted who disappeared into those shadows. I've walked there, picking mushrooms at the edge of dread. But don't be fooled. This isn't a Russian poem. This is not somewhere else, but here, our country, moving closer to its own truth and dread, its own ways of making people disappear. I won't tell you where the place is, the dark mesh of the woods, meeting the unmarked strip of light, ghost-ridden crossroads, leaf mold paradise. I know already who wants to buy it, sell it, make it disappear. And I won't tell you where it is. So why do I tell you anything? Because you still listen. Because in times like these, to have you listen at all, it's necessary to talk about trees.
Thank you so much, Abby, for that beautiful reading of the poem and of the excerpts from the story of Abraham, very uncharacteristically talking back to God. Normally, Abraham's a bit of a wimp in dealing with God. I can't give the kind of sermon today that comes most naturally to me, every word written out and every fact checked. I wrote a ton this week, and then I sliced and I diced it, and I sliced and I diced it some more, and I was left with notes. So I've got a handful of stories and other sources in mind, and some bare bones thoughts about how to string them together. It doesn't boil down, in my mind at least, to teaching a particular message. I'm just sketching a landscape that I hope invites thinking about some very difficult questions that matter. They matter a lot. But I need you to complete this sermon. I need you to use your life experience and feelings to fill in the holes. Maybe as I go along, you'll just write down enough of the key words to allow you to Google the bits that grab your attention, or something like that. This is not a package finished by me. I want to start by saying I had a generally wonderful visit recently with a congregant. It began on a really troubling note. The congregant told me that their father had stopped speaking to them, cut them off. The father had decided that they were unbearably liberal. It was heartbreaking to hear my congregant's voice resignation that the breach was not likely to be repaired. Now, with minor changes, this is a story I've heard from many congregants. So I don't expect you to be able to pick out who I'm thinking about just from what I said. It's actually a story that I really encounter all over the place these days. That everybody has a family member or a relative or a close friend with whom there's no longer any possibility of polite conversation, or indeed any conversation that strays anywhere near politics. And politics is infesting everything. It's as if we've reached some kind of tidal wave of emotional breaking points everywhere. I hear people saying with exasperation and pain something along the lines of, and on top of that, and sometimes I even hear myself saying it. Let me talk about what the underlying problem seems to be to me. The one danger that scares me more than all the rest. It's this danger, polarization, and not just polarization, but what I call runaway polarization, something that is pushing our two-party political system into its most monstrous form, something that is allowing this two-party system to create fear and anger, but not solutions to the problems that all of us want solved. And this polarization is like this beast that's gotten big enough to feed itself. That's why I think of it as runaway polarization. What's happened, in essence, is that all of these disagreements that have existed on so many issues, how we treat education and how we treat the poor, and how fast we move to dismantle racism, and even how we define racism, and now in the field of health, what we do about COVID, all of these things have been grafted on top of party politics. That's what's turned the partisan politics into a monster. It's made it a situation where what used to be opinion becomes a belief, and holding that belief becomes the price of being a part of your political community, and then that belief hardens into something that blocks true conversation across boundaries. I'm not passing myself off as an expert on the dynamics of all this, believe me. In fact, as the board knows, one of my focuses during my sabbatical that's coming up is going to be to go to some swing state where it really matters being able to cross boundaries, maybe Ohio, maybe Pennsylvania, maybe Georgia, and looking for groups of people that are still trying to have these conversations, and finding out how that's going. And I hope to bring back what I learned about that to you at the end of the sabbatical. But as your minister, I have to say, I have a current fear that really makes me feel like I have to talk to you about this subject today. And that is, I fear that too many of us have gotten too exhausted and too battered by the conflicts that are arising from the combination of the pandemic and this polarization to invest more of ourselves in communal lives. And I'm not saying that this pulling back from communal life, which could be viewed as the outside, as some kind of a depression, is a personal weakness kind of thing. I'm not saying it's not understandable. I'm not saying it doesn't fit important needs to regenerate ourselves. Those of us fortunate to escape the brunt of the losses during the past 2 years can never lose sight of that people who are investing less in communal life may be doing that because that is necessary for survival. But out of respect for the inherent worth and dignity of everybody, and also out of compassion, another one of our principles, we have to be concerned about sinking into habits and ways of seeing and being that sap us of hope and of life-giving love. Our Universalist forebears preached that we were all going to end up in the same place and that it was going to be a wonderful place. There was a brighter future for everyone. And because there was a brighter future for everyone, because everyone was going to be saved, we all had the opportunity during our lives to be part of working toward that brighter future. And they would have said that a religion is worthless if it allows people to drift into believing it's all I can do to save myself and those nearest me. And this is the kind of courage Poppy was talking about, that Martin Luther King talked about, of being in community to create love, to create a possibility for engagement beyond the conflict. And I'm with Dr. King on that point. I'm with our Universalist forebears. And, it's why we so often sing that very simple hymn with words from Rumi, the Sufi poet, "Come, come, whoever you are." And that wonderful line, "Ours is no caravan of despair." Somehow, we have to always be working together on making sure ours is no caravan of despair. So I have this collection of stories and a few readings, and I'm going to put them out there, and I'm going to say a little bit about what I'm thinking about them to create this landscape. And I hope you'll take in what is meaningful to you and maybe weave your own story and help us collectively weave the story of how we get to that place we need to be to build beloved community, to not retreat further than we have to or for longer than we have to from being in community. So that first reading that Abby shared is just so, there are whole books written on how to interpret Abraham's actual argument with God. I mean, the gall of Abraham arguing with God, but he does it. And he doesn't do it later when God tells him to kill his son Isaac, but he does it here. And he argues about justice and what's fair. And it comes down to a lot of possible lessons. But one of the ones that jumps out at me is that the bargaining stops when he gets down to 10. And what is the importance of 10? It seems to me the lesson here might be in the way our ancestors saw things, that there comes a point when there are too few of you in the group trying to do justice to change minds, to change the minds of the community that's sinning, to change God's mind. And at that point, all you can do is flee and save yourself. There is a point where what is the right tactic changes. And what's hard is defining what that point is, because it's not always 10. So the question that I keep coming back to, how big a leap is it to talk about 10 being the number where nothing works anymore, to these conversations you hear about, all I want is for all the red states to go away and be their own country. How big a leap is it to say we're severing these states, getting them out of our lives the way God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah? It's a little bit of a walk down the same path in my mind. And so I've thought these thoughts, and I don't think they're where I need to be if I'm trying to build a world based on love. So that's just one of the things I take away from that story, and there's lots of others. I welcome your thinking about it. Here's another story for all you football fans and people who aren't football fans but need to every now and then hear a story that thinks that something can come good out of football. So those of you who follow the game will know that last weekend there was a very, very tight playoff game between the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. And at the end, when it looked like the Bills finally had the upper hand and were going to win, in 13 seconds, the Chiefs drove far enough down the field to kick a tying field goal. And then they won the toss, and then they won the game in overtime. Now, it could have ended there. Oftentimes, when one side wins unexpectedly or whatever, there's a little bit of gloating and triumphant thinking. But one of the things that happened at the end of that game was that a Bills fan, a Chiefs fan or a small group of Chiefs fan, noticed that there was a tradition in Buffalo of people gathering together and making contributions to a children's hospital at the end of the season. And this was a hospital that the quarterback had set up a fund sponsoring in honor of his grandmother when she died. And someone posted on social media, okay, 13 seconds we won, but let's everybody give multiples of 13 money to the Buffalo for their hospital, their children's hospital. And within a few days, more than 10,000 Kansas City Chiefs fans raised $460,000 for that hospital. Now, I think somewhere buried in all of this is important information about how we cross our divisions in society and why, and what the real divisions are. And I wrote lots trying to piece together more about this, but I'm going to stop here. I just want you to think about this example, if it interests you. What is it about this situation that allowed people who had been opponents to suddenly stop being opponents? And if this is a hopeful story, where do people who are trying to build hope nurture it? And how, in what dimensions can that kind of way of being expand? So here's another story that illuminates some of this same issue. Some of you may have heard of an organization called Braver Angels. Braver Angels started out right after the election where Trump beat Hillary Clinton. And they wanted to create conversations between groups that define themselves as red and blue. And the conversations were set up in a very special way so that you were just listening to the other people and trying to understand where they came from, something Poppy also talked about. And they originally called themselves Better Angels in reference to the line in Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address where he appealed to the better angels of our nature. And then there turned out to be a trademark dispute over the term better angels. So they changed it to braver angels, and they said, well, this is actually better because to have these kinds of conversations and really get somewhere takes courage. Again, what Poppy was talking about. So they changed the name of the organization to Braver Angels. And during the pandemic, membership tripled to close to 10,000 people engaged, not just in these conversations, but in some other activities. They started sponsoring podcasts where somebody from the right or somebody from the left would just give a talk and people were invited to listen and ponder what they were hearing. So after one of these podcasts from a very conservative commentator, there was a woman named Morgan Holley who posted on Facebook, listening bravely is one thing. Merely listening with no place for fact-finding doesn't seem so brave. It makes for conversation where the two parties continue to talk past one another, like the worst partisan talks, just maybe a little more civil. So that, I think, says a lot about where we may be. If we've reached a situation where we can't actually do fact-finding, then we're in a very different place for brave conversations than we ever used to be. And unfortunately, it turns out that we are in a situation where fact-finding has become much more difficult. Instead of facts, we lift up opinions, and opinions become beliefs, and beliefs become something you have to hold on to be safe in your community, because it is all lined up with partisan political parties now, and the partisan political parties only know how to tear each other up. And I'm not sure where the hope is in this story. Can you get anywhere with conversations like Braver Angels is working on? They have individual stories of people say, I was very moved by this. I have a new friend from across the lines. We do things together. But is this enough to change the country? Or are we in that situation of Sodom where there's fewer than 10 and there's nothing to do but really flee? This is really difficult stuff, and highlighted for me when this week the Republican National Committee termed the assault on the Capitol that killed 5 people legitimate political discourse. So there's a huge amount of work to do here, and I'm not sure what lessons we take out of it. Another story. This is much more personal. The godmother of our children turns out to be someone who is not getting a vaccination. And it's not because she's against other people getting vaccinations, she says. She just has doubts that vaccination is right for her based on, and then it turns out the medical information she's relying on is just definitely not the best medical information out there, and she doesn't want medical information that will contradict it. And this has been very scary for me and Michelle. Unlike this woman's brother, I haven't condemned her. We still have wonderful relations. We still love her. But I realized that if we had confronted this situation when our kids were born, we would not have made her their godmother. That big a deal to us. The ability to look at what we think is scientific information. So to me, this is very painful because it talks about ruptures in our relationships that are made even though we continue to have love, but they're made because of the things that we just can't bend on. And how we deal with that, I think, has a lot to do with where we move forward. So I could go on, and I don't intend to. That would be abuse of the congregation. I do want to go back to Adrienne Rich's poem, though, In Times Like These. And the reason I want to talk about it as a hopeful story because it is a poem, and like a lot of Bible stories, it leaves out so much. It makes so many questions about whose voice isn't in it, what's really going on. It leaves room for you to find out where you really are, unlike an essay, which is more of an effort to really convince you to a certain point of view. When you read Adrienne Rich's poem, it tells us that our country is moving closer to its own truth and dread, its own ways of making people disappear. And it doesn't say whether that's a bad or a good thing. I actually think it's a good thing that we're really moving towards understanding truth and dread and ways we've made people disappear. I think that that's actually the only way through to beloved community, but she leaves room for people to view that as not a good thing, or at least a dangerous thing. She goes on to describe this beautiful historic meeting house touched by some unspecified struggle in the past. There's a little hint, maybe it was a stop on the Underground Railroad where persecuted people tried to disappear into the shadows. Or maybe some of them were caught because she says in the poem it's ghost-ridden. At any rate, she's found food to harvest from the decay at the site in the form of the mushrooms she picks. And she's getting spiritual vibes of engagement as well. She intends to hide its location from developers who will make it disappear. She says she's only talking to us because we will listen. And in times like these, that is so important. She's going to work hard to help us listen effectively, to be able to hear her and not dismiss her as on the other side of some divide. And as I was reading this, like the third or fourth time, it struck me, it's really interesting that she settled on listening. Listening is the sense that matures in the womb and is the last of our senses left for most of us. It's when someone is dying, they can hear you. When they can't see you, when all kinds of other things leave them, they can hear you in most cases. So it's almost like if we can't listen, we are really, really dead. And then she says this very interesting things. So we must start by talking about the two stands of trees. So what's that all about? Well, for me, it could be that trees, because they outlive us, really outlive us, are symbols of our ancestors' well-placed faith and hope. You know, they're put in certain places, trees, and they're there long after we're gone because somehow our ancestors are saying something's going to be here, life is going to be here, we want life to be here. And I found an echo this week in that thought. I was attending a ministers' conference, and Sophia Bentoncourt, who's one of the leading voices in our movement, who identifies as African American, was talking to the ministers. We had over 300 ministers online, and she was advocating that the voices are there at the margins among BIPOC people to teach us what we need about faith and hope in really troubling times. She said, we have survived cycles of the unspeakable. And we have survived cycles of the unspeakable. And she talked about the slave ships and other things. And maybe that message for us might be that from our history, there are an incredible wealth of voices that tell us about the power of hope and love. And when we retreat from activity in public, maybe we need to be retreating into the voices of those ancestors that we know are the best source of reviving our ability to be back in communal life. So is this a hopeful story? Is this a hopeful poem? What do hope builders at CVUUS do next to nurture it? In what dimension can it expand? So I want to close on a lighter note, but an important note, I think, also from that ministers' conference. Towards the very end, they had a song called Hope by Jason Robert Brown. It was part of the Friday closing worship service. And it is sung, but it is written, the lyrics can actually be almost a private musing, just delivered. And I'm going to read you the first verse and the last verse to end this sermon. I come to sing a song about hope. I'm not inspired much right now, but even so, I came out here to sing a song, so here I go. I guess I think that if I tinker long enough, one might appear. And look, it's here, one verse is done, the work's begun. There's another verse about hope, and then the song goes to, and so we sing about hope, though I can't guarantee there's something real behind it. I have to show my children I can find it. And so today, when life seems crazy and impossible to bear, it must be there. Fear never wins. That's what I hope. See, I said hope. The work begins. Blessed be. Amen.
Once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide in the strife of truth
Ronnie for our closing him to play this old standard that dates from before the Civil War. It's an abolitionist song, and it has a lot of truth in it about the need for courage and to stand up for your beliefs. It also has a lot of division in it, and the other side can only be won over by your willingness to be sacrificed. I think we've got to find another way. I think our world is more complicated. I think we need to be willing to make sacrifices, but I think if, as Poppy said, and as so many other people have said, as our societies become more complicated, if we can harness a way to love better, to love in more dimensions and in more ways, then there's a way for people on the other side to no longer be on the other side. You don't have to defeat them. You don't have to win them over. You don't have to necessarily even have a civil war. I'm not saying there will never be a situation where civil war is inevitable, but I am saying that we have moved into an age where we have tools that we need to love better, to love more effectively. And so my prayer for us as we go forward this week is that we go forward in the faith that they are there and in the hope that we can live our days in ways that make us people who understand how to use these tools, and through that make our congregation a beacon to the wider community.